Hey, how are you? Hey, we're going to do some good talking today about a good friend of mine. Stay tuned because I think you're going to enjoy these stories.
Welcome to Kilroy's Outlaws and Legends Behind the Music with your host, multi-award winning music producer, Eddie Kilroy. And now, here's your host, Eddie Kilroy.
Hey, boy, I'll tell you what I am excited about today. You know, I was blessed to have 4 decades in Nashville and to have so many friends. Each and every one of them just about were either songwriters or recording artists or perhaps recording engineers, but spent half my life in the studio producing a lot of these people, but a lot of them I didn't produce, of course. One that I didn't produce, but was a very, very good friend of mine, one of the most gentle spirits and one of the nicest gentlemen in country music. His name, Bobby Bear. What a guy Bear was. He was he had a sense of humor that was really, he went beyond dry, and he was naturally quiet, but he was like I said, a gentle guy, and sure didn't use up a lot of words saying hello. But I really, really loved Bobby Bear. Bobby's still rocking. He's still alive. Sure, he's on the lake, still getting in the boat, still going fishing up in Tennessee on one of the beautiful lakes there. But Bobby was a great recording artist that became a very astute publisher, music publisher of songs, and a great exhorter of a person who he thought had talent. Helped a lot of people get started there, and he had a lot of hits himself. And before we get into what he did personally in his recording career, but I know one person he really helped a lot was a guy that I think was one of the greatest songwriters that ever lived. He certainly was a stylist with his songs, and that was Billy Joe Shaver. Billy Joe signed with Bobby's publishing company, and Billy Joe was telling me, I slept on the floor in the office there when Bobby signed me for maybe $50 a week draw against future royalties. And when I had my first song recorded, I got to move up to the couch in the other room. So I camped out there for a year or so at Bobby's place. And Billy Joe was saying that laughingly, certainly not complaining. He too loved Bobby Bear. But Bobby had a career that was so interesting and so many, I don't want to say hills and valleys, but so many avenues to go around this hill and get back to the top of the other one and what have you. He started in his home state of Ohio, and he and another guy had written a song called All American Cow. No, not All American Cowboy. What in the world was it? Good golly, Miss. Oh, yeah. What was the name of that song? How quickly I forgot. Bobby Bears. Anyway, Bobby was something else. Anyway, Come Here, Cat, will make you a star. All American Boy was the name of it, not Cowboy. And it was under the name of Billy Paston. And he had a big record on that. And the way that came up with, he had co-written with Billy Parsons that song, and somehow when he pitched it to Fraternity Records, a small label out of Ohio, um, they liked the demo on it, so they put the demo out. And look up All American Boy by Billy Parsons, and you'll see what I'm talking about. It's a big record. I think that record, if I'm not mistaken, and forgive me if I make a mistake because I don't make notes. I pull everything out of a memory that's getting full of stuff all the time. But they released the demo, and it went to, I think it went #2 in the nation or something, or top 5 anyway. All American Boy by Bill Parsons, okay? That was really Bobby Bear. And believe it or not, right after that, he went in the Army. So he was kind of on a military vacation for a while. And while he was gone, this Fraternity Records found a bunch of old stuff that Bobby had written. And while he was in the Army, they put it all together and they put the album out under the name of Bill Parsons. And gosh, years later, Sears Roebuck had a record company then, you could order records from Sears. I added the Roebuck to it because at that time I think it was Sears Roebuck and not referred to as Sears. Not sure about that either. Memory bank getting full. Anyway, that album did really good, but it didn't make a charts or anything. It was on a small label called Fraternity and then on the Sears Roebuck label. But he decided to, hey, I'm going to Nashville, Tennessee, and I'm going to do something there in the big time way. Sure enough, he goes to Nashville. He looks up, the same person I looked up the first day I got there, except he got to see him. I didn't, and that was Chet Atkins running RCA Records. And Chet liked him, and he liked his talent. He liked his laid-back sound. He was really laid back in his talk and in his music and what have you. And he signed with RCA Records. And man, he went to cutting hits with Chet like you could not believe it. He wrote hits. Shel Silverstein, a great writer, which I'll talk about maybe later today if we have time. But he had so many things. He had Shel wrote a big song, and I know you'll remember that Bobby cut called Marie LeBeau. You remember Marie LeBeau? That was a big record. How I Got to Memphis was another one. Gosh, I'm trying to think of everything he did have. Sylvia's Mother. And that record went over into the pop charts pretty big also. So he did a lot of things. Bobby was varying from his music and always looking for one of my favorite songs Billy Shaver wrote, Ride Me Down Easy. Boy, that was a good record by Bobby, if you remember, and I know you do, if you were a fan of Bobby Bare, Ride Me Down Easy. And Marie LeBeau, now that record went '1. That was a huge record. And he went over to Mercury Records for a little while. He didn't stay too long, and he went back over to RCA, where he recorded some children's songs on an album, Legends of Lies, and that went pop. He really didn't play much country, and his son sang on one of those records with him. And then I can keep naming off Bobby's records, but I name off the ones that come to my mind that were some of my favorites. How I Got to Memphis. Oh, that was a good one. You bet it was. And, another one, Drop Kick Me Jesus. Who would have come up with that? Whoever wrote that was Paul Kraft. Paul Kraft was the writer of that. Not a huge writer that wrote a lot of hits, but when he would write one, it would be a good one. And Drop Kick Me Jesus Through the Goalpost of Life. That was a good line in that song, and Paul did a good thing to do. You know, I want to tell you a story right now, and you must take this in context, okay? And you must also take it with Bobby Bare's slow-talking, soft, gentle spirit. As far as I know, I don't know of anyone that was more friends with Bobby Bare than Jerry Reed. They both had houses on the lake, and they lived to fish. I mean, those guys fished every day when one of them wasn't in the studio. Reed may have been off for a few weeks making a movie with that guy with a mustache from Florida. Has some old Appaloosa horses. Burt Reynolds, yeah, that's Burt. I can't remember his name. I remember the horses, but hard to remember a guy, but you never forget a horse, okay? But he did some movies with him, and he had some hit records. Jerry was very talented. He was a really fine guitar player. And really that, believe it or not, after his singing and his acting, he was a better guitar player than he was a singer and an actor. He was extremely talented, Reed was. But getting back to the story of how close that Bobby Bare and Reed were, Jerry Reed and Bobby were almost inseparable. They were on the lake, both of them being obsessed with fishing, which I never got into fishing in the lake because it took too many lures. And it confused me. But Bobby asked me a lot of times, hey, come on, go fishing with Reed and I declined gracefully, of course. But the real funny story is, a lot of people don't know this. I know that when Liz and I got married, I had to explain to her the dry humor and the subtle humor that only music people had, that I knew anyway. And Bear had that same thing going. And me and Bobby, you got to put this in perspective. Your best friend is dying. I mean, you won't fish with him anymore. You won't laugh with him anymore. we've all experienced that in our life, and Reed was dying. And Bobby went to the hospital several times, but the last time he went, Reed says he's very weak. He's in bed. He's in the process of going home to the Lord. And he said, Bear, they tell me that I don't have but a few days to live, and I'm gonna die. And Bobby didn't say anything. A little bit went by, and Reed said, well, aren't you gonna say something? And Bear said in his typical style, said, yeah, can I have your fishing poles? And I thought that was a funny thing, because Bear said that with dear love for Jerry Reed. But what else are you going to say? Oh, I'm sorry, I'm going to miss you, you're going to die, oh Lord. But no, he said, hey man, can I have your fishing poles if you're going to die? So we all got a chuckle out of that. Who was telling me that story that was there with him then? It would have been Jerry Chestnut. I can't remember the guy that was telling me that was a funny story. And they said Reed just kind of smiled and went on, and eventually soon he passed away. And we lost a great talent with Jerry Reed. Have I talked about Drop, Kick Me Jesus? Yeah, Paul Kraft wrote that song. But he went up to Nashville. I had a lot of them. Some of them were my favorite. Some of them I thought were good, but then there's some that just stood out. Detroit City, oh my gosh, was that a huge record? Yeah, he got an award, and he did a lot of things. Detroit City, yeah, and it's How I Got to Memphis. Yeah, that was a big record. Yeah, and he did some TV work and some movie work. The only thing I remember him doing was a TV thing called No Time for Sergeants. And I really don't think that Bear was ever interested in TV or movies or anything. He concentrated mostly on his publishing company, which was started after he became a star and became very, very successful. Marie Laveau, I never will forget, Shel Silverstein wrote that song. Some people don't know the name of Shel Silverstein, but I think you would be interested in doing a online search for Shel Silverstein. You'll find it fascinating. Extremely talented guy. And I'm talking about Shel now because his relationship with Bear was very close also. Bear recorded over 100 of Shel Silverstein's songs. And Shel wrote a couple of songs that were pretty big, like Try On This One, A Boy Named Sue. Huh? Yep. That was a big song that Shel wrote for, and Johnny Cash had, of course, the big records on it. You remember that? They had so many hits, and Bobby just kept coming up with hits. Shel would write a song, and Bobby was never a big writer. He was not into writing, but he had a good ear for a new song. But then again, when you brought a song in from Shel, it apparently was going to be a big hit. Shame on Me was a big record. Got a Grammy Award for Detroit City. It was like another big record. Bobby Bear had a long career. Right now, I think he's spending most of his time on the lake and doing some fishing, and I don't blame him. But Bobby was always a part of the Nashville music scene in a quiet way. He wasn't a hanger-outer. You didn't see him at some of our evening haunts where we might go have a drink or have a beer and see what happened during the day and swap a few lives with each other and kind of hang out. Bobby, I never did see him around there. He was mostly in the studio or kind of hanging out at RCA and visiting with Chet and some of the guys. And he was just Bobby Bear. I cannot say enough things nice about Bobby Bear. A perfect gentleman, one talented son of a gun, and he's still alive and well. I am glad to report. I may get Bobby on the phone soon. I haven't talked to him, and gosh, I haven't talked to Bobby Bear probably in 12 years, I think, or maybe 10 years. It's been a while, but I do know that he's alive and kicking and well and probably still fishing and still thinking about songs. And he'll always be loved by the people at RCA because he sold millions of records there. Chet Atkins is gone. He and Chet were close. Chet's the one that signed him to RCA. And of course, it straight to that long run of hits. And then I didn't talk to Bear about this, but he did something a little unusual. He and Chet decided they weren't really grooving together in spite of the hits, so he went over to Mercury Records from RCA, and he had some hits there. And don't pin me to the wall and ask me what the name of them were, but there were a couple of hits there. And he was only on that label a year or so, maybe a bit more than a year, and boom, he's back with Chet at RCA, and they just picked up where they left off, cutting hit records. But I'll always remember Bobby Bear, and do today, and I consider him way up at the top of my friends, in spite of the distance we live. He's still in Nashville. We're in Oklahoma City. Otherwise, I'd go down the road and see him or tell him to come over to the house, and we might have a beer. We would definitely talk and tell some stories, and I'd get him to do an imitation of one of his songs called Marie Laveau. Speaking, I've got to tell you one thing. Shel Silverstein. I told you to do a Google search on Shel Silverstein. What an incredibly talented guy, and what a different guy. Okay, first time I was running Hugh Hefner's record label, Playboy Records, and I started Mickey Gilley there and Bobby Borson. We just had tons of hit records. I was so grateful for that. And Shel Silverstein, I knew, was really close to Hugh Hefner, the guy I was working for. And he wanted to show me some songs. I'd never met Shel before, but I knew he was a songwriter. And hey, he's my boss's friend, so I'm going to be his friend, right? That makes sense. And he came to the office and he wanted to sing me some songs. I'd never met him before. And he got a guitar out. He knew probably 3 or 4 chords. He was mostly a lyricist. And he started singing. And I thought, oh, this is the funniest thing I've ever heard, because he was hollering and he was screeching and it was no melody anywhere, just a screeching and hollering. And I'm going, oh, this is really funny. I didn't know he was serious. And here I am laughing at the boss's best friend. He just couldn't sing. And I didn't know it. I thought it was a joke at first, but he took it well, and we became, again, good friends. But he wrote so many songs. He wrote children's books. He started off doing cartoons for Playboy magazine in Chicago, where he was born and raised, along with Hefner. And he was doing some cartoons from the old Playboy magazines in those days. And he was close to Hef, and consequently, I made sure I never made fun of his singing again. Well, I'm going to wrap it up on that, on Bear and Shel Silverstein, but look them both up. Maybe I'm working off my memory, and I'm sure there's more online than what I can remember. So check them both out. Shel Silverstein, fascinating person, and Bobby Bear, he might pick up on something there that I've missed in my memory. In the meantime, I want to thank our sponsor, Total Feeds. It's so good for them to be on board with us and help us bring this podcast to you, which I hope you will subscribe, because I don't want you to miss one, and catch all the stories that I know from the 4 decades in Nashville. I love telling the stories to you. But getting back to Total Feeds, they make, as the name implied, Total Feeds. They've got feeds for every species. Total Equine is for the horses, which we feed our horses. Total Bovine for these muscular bulls on the PBR and on Pro Rodeo. They have Total Canine for your good dogs. Or your bad dogs, they'll eat the food. And I've seen bad dogs eat this food and become lap dogs. It's magic. I'm just kidding about it, but it's healthy food for them. Total People, you take that and you get to feeling good. Oh boy, they've been so good. I got to start grinding. I could talk to you forever, but I got to get out of here. I love being with you. God bless you guys. Look out for the next podcast, Kilroy's Outlaws, Images, and Behind the Music. We're going to be getting it.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Kilroy's Outlaws and Legends Behind the Music. If you have any thoughts or questions about the content, email them. Kilroy Outlaws and Legends, all one word, at yahoo.com. That's Kilroy, no S, Outlaws and Legends, all one word, at yahoo.com. And don't forget to subscribe. Third-party use of any part of this podcast without the expressed consent of Eddie Kilroy is prohibited. The Kilroy's Outlaws and Legends Behind the Music podcast is a production of Eddie Kilroy.